Fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery.
Well, welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren. We got Mr. Pollen Joel.
What am I today? Pollen. There you go. Pollen smoker, DIY, Reverend. Take your pick. Yep. It's pollen season, everybody.
It's got to be hard doing. It's pollen season only in Chicago.
Only into Chicago, greater Chicago land, everyone.
Nobody else deals
7 o'clock
with
in the
that.
morning. Yeah.
Everybody else is doing that in spring when it's supposed to be. But
I'm sorry. When you have a nose like mine, I collect it from other states.
Yeah. You can tell when it's pollen season in New York.
Yeah. Then, well, New York, that's Matt's job. I'm sure there's no pollen in Brooklyn like that.
No, it's too scared to be in Brooklyn.
Matt will have to tell us.
Yeah. Well, we've got he's been a true crime writer, several great books out over the years, and now he's gone into fiction. And this is his first crack at it. Very good one, too, as well. I'm totally recommending it on board. It's called The Wicked, and it's Matt Birkbeck. So thank you for being here, Matt.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So, Matt, you've been doing nonfiction and true crime books for over 10 years now. So your new book, The Wicked, it's a fiction. What led you to that book?
So this was actually a book that I first thought about 20 years ago when I was a newspaper reporter. It was just an idea I had in my head. I was covering a town in Pennsylvania. I was working for the Allentown Morning Call at the time. And I was covering this town called Jim Thorpe, which is this tourist town. It's this beautiful town. It's something out of the 1800s. It's small. It's off the Lehigh River. And it's as if, everything stopped in like 1875. And, they basically had refurbished. They have these buildings that are still there. It was an old mining town. And it was actually the country's mining capital at the time. A lot of coal came through that area. And so I just had this idea. It was really about the town. I just thought I'd love to create a story that would fit into this town. And so I just continued to think about it over the years. I did A Beautiful Child, and then I did my Sammy Davis Jr. book. I have written a number of true crime books, but, I don't necessarily think of myself as a true crime writer. These are just stories I happen to, as an investigative reporter, as an investigative journalist, I just happened to have gotten into, whether it was during my time at People magazine when I was covering Robert Durst, or when I was at the Morning Call and I first started covering Russell Buffalino, the head of the Buffalino crime family. But in any event, so between work, my daily job, and between doing Deconstructing Sammy, and then I did The Quiet Dawn, and then Finding Sharon, and I had all that going on. I spent a lot of time along with the FBI and National Center for Missing and Exploited Children trying to find the identity of this girl that I had written about. And then I didn't have an ending for that book, and I didn't have an ending for my Durst book when it came out. And so the other thing I wanted to do was I wanted to have a book that ended on the very last line, which is something that's kind of difficult when you're doing nonfiction because you don't create the facts. You have to follow the facts. So it was just a story that was stuck in my head, and I talked to my wife about it, and she always pushed me to write it. And I actually started doing it in 2019, and then I got real busy. I had to put it aside because I started interviewing Billy D'Elia, who took over for Russell Buffalino, and I did the book The Life We Chose, and then I started working my Netflix film, Girl in the Picture, which was adapted, A Beautiful Child and Finding Sharon were the source books for that. And then I started work on this. I have another book coming out in January that's actually going to be pretty exciting, which is back to nonfiction. But I just got real busy with all of that, and I had to put it aside. And then I was talking to my agent and talked to my wife, and my wife was for years been pushing me to get this book out and to do it. And I wanted to give it a shot. It was just something where I could be more creative. I could basically do what I wanted to do. Of course, I had to do a lot of research on it. But I did it. I enjoyed it, and finally got it out yesterday.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, I guess the good thing is when you're in a fiction, you can choose what happens and kind of select your own justice. You know what I mean? Like, because when you're doing a true story, it is what it is. You can't really change things. What was the biggest challenge for you going into fiction, but coming from nonfiction?
Basically creating the actual story and the twists and the turns. So with the nonfiction books that I write, and you know this, the facts are there. You got to do your research. You got to spend a year, 2 years, whatever, digging up everything you can, doing all your interviews, getting all the paperwork, and then, it's there sitting in front of you. And with nonfiction, you need to then create a story that is going to be compelling and get people to read it. So in doing that, I follow the formula where I need to come up with a great opening, have a nice arc in the middle, and then come up with, hopefully have a good ending to it. A couple of my books didn't in the beginning, which again led me to on this fiction road. But still, you're already dealing with a set of facts. I mean, the thing with nonfiction also is you're also doing your own research, and you do some investigative reporting too, and you're coming up with some new information. With fiction, it's a blank canvas. It's a blank, it's wide open. You can do whatever you want on it, draw anything you want on it. Only it has to be, you have to create a story. Obviously, you have to have characters. You have to create the characters. Everything has to flow. From the beginning to the middle to the end, everything has to come together at the end. And it does take a little while to make sure you got it all right. Cause, you might be reading, this even happened to me. I wrote the book and I was actually reading it a couple of months ago as they were getting it ready to be published. And I noticed it was a mistake. I misidentified someone's eyes, for instance, and I was like, oh man, I got to catch that, little things like that. But, it's really about creating a story. And, in this case, I also did a lot of research, as a reporter, as an investigative reporter, and I cover a lot of criminal justice. I also come sort of from that background. My dad was a cop in New York. And so, I knew a lot of cops, and later on in life, I got to know a lot of attorneys, got to know a lot of FBI guys, other law enforcement officials. So, there's always this theme of justice. Believe it or not, in this little town of Jim Thorpe, it was this huge story regarding justice. And it had to do, with events that occurred in the 1870s involving a group of miners called the Molly Maguires. Some of your listeners may know who they are. Some of them may have even seen a movie with Sean Connery in 1968 called The Molly Maguires. They were basically Irish miners who got fed up with how they were being treated and, took justice into their own hands. So I found that part of the story really interesting, and I kind of worked it into this book. I don't want to give away too much, but that whole feeling, it's a story of redemption, and it's also a story of justice, and it's something that I wanted to kind of meld together, and then to a point where you get to the end, and then folks are wondering what's going to happen. And as I said before, I was finally able to nail a book where I could end it on the very last sentence.
Hey, Matt, this is Joe. You said a lot there, and I just could make this a broad question. You started that you had the location, so I'm trying to figure out, you had the location, and you're a storyteller, and you had the characters. I'm trying to figure, and you had themes, redemption, like, how did you balance? Where did you sort of start? What did you wedge into what? Location first, or create the character, or you had the story and you wanted to use the location? What was your mental process trying to put these pieces together?
It was the location. It was Jim Thorpe. It's very unique. It's just visually. And then there's the history of Jim Thorpe. Plus it was named, it's a little town. Most people are unfamiliar with it or where it is. It's about 70 miles northwest of Philadelphia, about 2.5 miles west of New York City. And it was named Jim Thorpe in the early 1950s when the real Jim Thorpe, the athlete, died in the town the town was down on its luck. and they wanted to draw tourists. So what they did was they cut a deal with Jim Thorpe's widow and paid her $25,000 to bring his remains to this town, which was called Mach Chunk at the time, where I had been for years. And then they renamed the town Jim Thorpe. So the town itself to me was just really interesting. And then the process was, and as I said, this was a very long process for me, in that it was something I thought about over the years, and little bits and pieces would come to me, different scenes and this and that. And then obviously I had to write what I knew. So I start with a reporter, someone that's not very likable, or someone who was once likable earlier in his career, and then gave into some of the excesses that were available to him from becoming a very, very successful journalist. And that includes, making a lot of money, knowing people, things like that. So basically you got some dueling, you have some characters in this book, including this one, who are not at their best and are struggling with their identities and struggling with where they are in life. And they're dealing with some pretty big issues. And then they're faced with decisions that they have to make, particularly the reporter, and that's where we get into things like redemption. So, putting that all together, it wasn't necessarily hard for me. It was just trying to make the characters themselves, just keep people interested, and that's why I go back to my nonfiction writing. My job as a nonfiction writer is to basically take all the facts that I got and create, it's narrative nonfiction. So you got to create something that you hope is enjoyable to the reader. And in this case, with fiction, obviously you have to write something that's enjoyable to the reader. You're going to get them in the beginning and keep them through. Only now you're going to be creating your own scenes, and you have to make sure that every scene means something and everything follows through, and there's nothing that's awkward throughout or has the reader scratching their head and asking themselves, hey, why is this here, or why is that there, or whatever.
Well, do you have a process? It's quite a bit different if you write characters, you've created them. Do you kind of see them in your mind? Do you kind of know what they look like and kind of have a voice for them? Or what's your process with your characters?
It is, inspiration comes in many forms, in many ways. So I could be watching a TV program and there's a character, and I would say to myself, wow, he would be great in this book. If I can recreate someone like him, could he be one of the main characters that I'm writing about? Which I did do. And then there are other characters I thought about, kind of mixtures of people that I know and things that, and their personalities. And others are just ones that I might just create out of thin air. I don't, there are a lot of writers who will put up, whether they're writing in an office or a home office or in their garage or whatever, and they might have a big wallboard and they'll jot down everything. They'll put down, the story, they'll put down each chapter, what they want to call the chapter, their characters, who the character's going to be, how this is going to play out. I've never done that. With my nonfiction books, I get all my research together. I put them in files. I, organize them based mostly on the date, in terms of where I'm starting the story and where I'm going to end it. With fiction, I know it's just something I've always been able to do in my head. I just know who the characters are. And as I'm writing it, they just come alive and I just keep going with it. And then I might turn to other things for more inspiration. I can't tell you how many movie soundtracks I've listened to, in terms of writing this book. There were many different ones. Some of them were, dramatic. Some of them were from horror movies. Some of them were from adventures. But they all help, in terms of creating, just creating, there's a town that's in place already, but creating everything that's going on within the town and then within the people.
Yeah, but so who inspired the bad characters?
Well, they inspired themselves.
We want names, phone numbers.
Brother-in-law.
Yeah, actually, I'll give you one. He's a great actor, and why am I not remembering his name now? But he was in the John Wick movies. He played, He plays the manager of the Continental in New York.
Oh, Ian.
Yes. Yes, that's him. And he was in Deadwood years ago. Actually, I thought his character in Deadwood was just incredible. So I kind of tapped some of that. So he's one of the characters that's in the book. And he plays actually a pretty big role. So just using that as inspiration and thinking of that character and how he would fit with one of the individuals that I'm writing about. I might think of some actors. When I write, my nonfiction books too, I kind of think of them as 2-hour screenplays. So they're very visual. And I'll think of actors that could play different parts, different characters. And I did that with this book too. And I thought of a whole wish list of actors that, I would just, drop if I was ever able to work with them. But, and they were inspirational. I could imagine them playing the character and then adding dialogue to it. And that helped. So, and that all contributed to bringing this book to life.
Ian McShane, for all people who were screaming at their radios.
Yes, I know they're probably screaming at me too. I mean, I thought about it for years, so I should have.
I've watched them. It's age, everybody. Age. That's Social Security this year. So I'm trying to remember my question I was going to ask. Oh, so you had a story location. Did you know? You knew the ending. You knew that last line when you started, or did that just develop as you said?
I knew it. Yep, I knew it when I wrote. So my very first book was A Deadly Secret on Robert Durst, serial killer from New York. His family owns half of Manhattan. Big to-do, big story, the Jinx on HBO, whatnot. I covered that story years ago when I was a correspondent for People magazine. And when I wrote the book, he had just been arrested. And we didn't know anything. There was nothing else about, the verdict, the victims, what happened to them, things like that. Didn't have an ending. It was frustrating. The most frustrating one was A Beautiful Child, where I wrote this book about this beautiful, young, but tragic woman named that I knew as Sharon Marshall. And it was a great book, a great story. And readers would be, I get emails from all over the world from readers that would just be angry because there was no ending to it at the time. The hope, when I wrote that book, my hope was that I would get enough support and get enough interest so we would eventually find her identity. But I didn't count on folks getting upset with reading the book and then, being angry over the fact that there was no ending to it. Thankfully, we were able to get an ending to that. So one of the things I first thought about years ago was that, and I got the ending. The ending, when you end up reading the book and you get to the ending, it was something, it was one of the first things I thought about. And I would just say to myself, man, this would be a killer ending. And so I basically wrote the book to get that ending.
Well, so is there some subtext, is there a meaning? Is there something you'd like to see the readers take away from this book, or is it pure entertainment for you?
No, it's a story of good and evil. It's a story, as I said earlier, of people who are, they've, for in this case, you have a reporter, who's been very successful, but has issues. And, he was once someone that people liked a lot and had a lot of promise, and then kind of lost his way. And then the question becomes, he locks onto something. There's a murder in Jim Thorpe. I could say that much, a Catholic priest is murdered. And he knew the priest, so he comes to the funeral. Only it's initially said that he committed suicide, and he doesn't necessarily believe it. So that's where the story takes off, and he starts digging. And so, and it's through that digging and through, he went from being an investigative reporter to writing some real cheesy columns for a Philadelphia newspaper. Now he's doing what he used to do, which was doing investigative reporting, and he's doing his digging and whatnot. And, his old talent is coming back, and he's feeling better about himself, and he's feeling good, and he feels like he's on a righteous path. And then he meets up with other people who were dealing with similar circumstances. There's a police chief, a woman who's got her issues. And that's what's going on here. As you're trying to solve this mystery, what's going on with this priest? Why did he die? He's introduced to this town with this real interesting history, this old mining history, and now, named after an American hero who never set foot in this town ever. And as you continue to go on this journey with him and with some of these others, and the story builds to a point where decisions have to be made, and they're pretty weighty. So, in any event, so that's where it goes to.
Well, Matt, let me ask you this question. You have the themes, good and evil, and you're writing that about the historical town and this event that happens from present time. But are there things that you said, you know what, I don't think I want to put this in the book, or this is too far, or I've got to have this, or I don't want to say you self-censored yourself, but there were some things you said, nah, I don't think I want to put that in here.
Let me tell you something about modern publishing, which you may have experienced, okay? Sent the manuscript to my agent, and then people within the agency read the book. And the comments that I got back, I guess it was people in their 20s who read it. They don't like how some of the women are described or some of their actions. They don't like some of the language. I'm open to criticism. I'm open to making changes. I'm open to doing anything that would make the book better. But this was more of a cultural thing. It was, I kind of thought about it. It wasn't me. Like, they wanted me to make changes it wasn't me. And I didn't do it. And I was kind of, I'm not gonna say I was angry over it, but I think basically they were trying to fit the story more into 2020s, young people thinking. And I've got two boys, one's in their 20s, one's in their early 30s. I don't even know what that is anymore, to be honest. So
yeah,
I just got to go with what I have to go. But, this happened to me when I did my Sammy Davis Jr. book, where I was once asked, which was another interesting book about an investigation into the life of Sammy Davis Jr. after he died, and he was $15 million in debt. And my editor, at the time when the book was done, I'm writing my acknowledgements, and I'm thanking her. And she didn't want me to include her name because this was 2008, and there was a reference to Barack Obama. It was a mild reference, but it was about him hosting a fundraiser for a mob guy that was in the book. And if I was going to keep that in the book, she didn't want her name attached to it. So I'm thinking to myself, man, I don't want to lose her. The book's coming out. But by the same token, am I going to let someone tell me who I can and cannot have in the book? And I actually made the decision. It wasn't important enough to keep the name in the book, to keep Obama's name in the book. If it had anything to do with anything important, I would have just said absolutely not. No, that's it. But I did take it out, and I said to myself, I'll never do that again. Though I didn't feel good after I did that. And so then I got this, but then doing this book now, and I'm getting some of these cultural responses on, and about characters. Why don't we have this character or another character? And I'm like, I can only stay true to how I want to do it. To what I think makes the best story. And so that's what I ended up doing.
Well, that's all you can do, right? Because it'll wreck the characters and change if you change things, I think. But
yeah, it's your book.
Yeah, it does, and it does. I mean, I kind of stayed away with. It's also a love story in terms of the reporter and who he meets in this town, and there are a couple of scenes between him and a woman who's a police chief in the town, and some things that folks objected to. Not necessarily physical scenes, but more about lines that were in the book, dialogue, language, and I just dismissed it. I just got to stay the way it is.
Yeah, it's got to fit the character. But I've had that from editors on nonfiction, even true crime, where they thought some of the language should be changed because it was a little bit maybe too harsh for them. And it's like, well, it's true. It's real. This is what they really said.
Right.
That doesn't make sense to change what someone actually was saying to someone else, and you're, writing the conversation. But that's just the times, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that we're even asked to do that bothers me.
Yeah.
And it happens. And even though the publishing world, just like the media world itself has been shrinking for years now, you're getting more and more of those requests. When I did my first book in 2001, it was, here's your advance, go write. See you. Oh, here's the book, great. I don't recall having a conversation with my editor after I turned it in about anything in the book. Now, now it's like there's questions on almost everything. So,
I don't know how.
you don't want to, you don't want to offend people. I mean, that's the modern day mantra.
Well, you don't want to offend people,
So-
but at the same time, things are real. They are what they are. It's not like,
No, that's my point. They are real, but they, their point of view is you don't want to offend people,
yeah.
or you don't want to offend too many people. But in doing a nonfiction book, I'm not going to change the thing if it's real, if it happened, and that would be my argument. And I could get pretty testy about it.
Well, yeah, actually, well, in the one case, the one character was saying to the other that these are real people, that because they were burning down buildings and stuff, and they were making plans, and the one guy liked the Portuguese sausage maker in the Portuguese part of town, and he said, well, he always called it the ghetto, the Portuguese ghetto, and they wanted me to change it to working class neighborhood.
You see that? That would infuriate.
Yeah, I
me.
was like, well, that makes no sense. This is what he said. This is his words. How could you change real words? And who says that?
Right, but that's my point. Unfortunately, we're seeing more and more of that today. Or there are more and more requests, which is basically those were the kinds of requests I was getting with The Wicked, where, it wasn't about a particular scene. It was the language that I was using. And it just fit, again, it's a fiction book, so I can do whatever I want, in nonfiction. No, I wouldn't, I would be, I'd be standing firm.
No, I did. Actually, I went to a different publisher completely. By the end of that, it just changed. So I don't know. No. So listen, with this book, what do you think it's done for you? How do you think it's changed you? And I ask that because it's a different process than doing nonfiction and all that stuff. And being so close to yourself, being a journalist, reporter type thing, and now writing it in a character that comes from you. Do you think it's improved yourself in writing in different ways, or done any changes?
Yeah, actually it has. And I really enjoyed it. Nonfiction is hard, and it's hard in terms of the amount of research that you have to do. It's, I've always been one to go, I go through paperwork. I read everything. You could read, 1,000-page document, and I'm, searching for one little nugget in there. And it's a lot of work. It's very intensive. My book, this book that I have coming up, spent 2 years on it. It was hard. Doing the Billy D'Elia book was hard because I'm not just, his book was hard because I wasn't just about interviewing him for a year and a half, the former head of a crime family of all people. But also digging into, the history of his family and, and the rest of the organized crime in the United States. This, in doing, The Wicked, I really enjoyed it. It's a much easier, project for me to do. And I'm enjoying it. It's not that I enjoy doing the nonfiction, because I do. I mean, there are days and, it could be weeks where you're kind of beating yourself up over a few things, or something might not be working. But with the fiction, it's just, you're just writing it. And if at the end of the day, you go back and you read it, you don't like it, you just take it out. You can't do that with nonfiction, because the facts are the facts. You got to include them in, and if you have a hard time trying to work that in there, you got to keep thinking about it in terms of, how am I going to do this, or where am I going to put it in? And then, of course, since it's a true story, you got 1 million people who are going to read it or have an opinion on it, and especially people that you write about. And then you got to deal with that fallout after the fact, which is fine. It's part of the territory. I get it. But with fiction, I'm just writing. I enjoyed it. It's much more creative, and it's something that I do want to do again. So, that's where I'm kind of at with that. And perhaps even, I've got a couple of TV projects going on. One of them, I may work on the screenplay. So it's something I think I can get into and do well. So that's another area I think I might get into too.
Oh, sounds good. So let's talk about connections and how you like to have people contact you. Website, social media, bar, lemonade stand.
Website's www.mattbirkbeck.com. I have an Instagram site that is matt.birkbeck.author. And those are the two primary ways to get to me. Although, I'm guessing there are other ways. I had a guy actually come to my house a couple of weeks ago. He found my address. This never happened to me in my career. And he claimed to be the son of Whitey Bulger.
Wow.
And why he would come to my house, of all people. I think I mentioned Whitey Bulger in a couple of paragraphs in my books. But this guy somehow found me online and found my address and came to my house and had the cops escort him off the property.
Wow.
But those are the two primary ways that folks can look me up and find out what I'm working on. I think I made a reference earlier. I have another book coming out in January. It's called The Bookie, and it's a really cool project that I was brought in to work with Art Manteris, who's the former head bookie. He ran the book at Caesar's Palace and then Las Vegas Hilton in the 1980s and 1990s. And then 20 years, he worked at Stations Casinos. So he's one of the preeminent authorities on sports betting. And his story was just incredible, but not just his story and the people that he was with, but it's also where he thinks we're going today, the advent of online sports betting, which has been a disaster in this country, particularly amongst young people. So it's a really entertaining book. It's going to be a big book. He's great. I mean, it's his life story. He's the guy. I mean, if you ever want to know anything about sports betting, you're going to have to read this. And all the different characters that he, celebrities, sports stars, whatnot, did business with over the course of years. But his thoughts on what we're dealing with now and where we're going in terms of sports betting and what needs to be done are really interesting. And I think it's going to be, given where we're at with sports betting today, it's going to be a must read. So that's something I'm looking forward to come January.
Yeah, sounds fantastic. Wow. Again, it's always a pleasure, and we appreciate you being here. And everyone, the new book, The Wicked, Matt Birkbeck. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
This has been a production of the House of Mystery Radio Show. To find out more about our show, guests, or hosts, go to our website at houseofmysteryradio.com.